The air in Arthur Thorne's new apartment tasted of sterile newness and unspoken regret. Each breath felt thin, unsatisfying. 3 weeks had passed since the divorce papers had been formally filed, weeks that had morphed into a strange, suspended animation. The carefully curated minimalist space, all cool grays and stark whites, was supposed to signify a fresh start, a clean slate. Instead, it felt like a tomb. Arthur, at 42, was an architect by profession, a master of structure and form, yet his own life had crumbled into shapeless ruins. His firm, Thorne and Associates, was a pillar of the city's skyline, his designs lauded for their elegant simplicity. But the elegance he projected outwards had never extended inwards. His marriage to Eleanor, a quiet, luminous woman who had once been his anchor, was now a fractured memory. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city lights beginning to prick the twilight. Each pinprick felt like a distant judgment, a reminder of the million tiny acts of dishonesty that had led him here. Eleanor had discovered his affair with Sophia, not the first, but the last. This one had lasted longer, spun a finer web of deceit, entangled more deeply than the others, and when it unraveled, it had torn everything apart. The initial numbness had been a shield, a blessed reprieve from the agony of consequence. But now, it was dissolving, replaced by a creeping loneliness that seeped into his bones. He missed the familiar scent of Eleanor's jasmine tea in the mornings, the soft rustle of her turning pages as she read beside him in the evenings. He missed the comfortable silence that had once defined their connection, a silence he had unknowingly poisoned. His phone buzzed. Marcus Vance, his divorce lawyer, and reluctantly his closest friend. Marcus, sharp-witted and cynical, had seen it all. He had, with a weary sigh, taken on Arthur's case, less out of professional obligation and more out of a grim loyalty to a man he barely recognized anymore. "Arthur, you signed the financial disclosures, right?" Marcus's voice was clipped, efficient. "Yes, sent them back this morning." Arthur's voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "Good. Eleanor's lawyer wants to finalize the settlement terms by end of next week. She's being remarkably fair, considering." "Considering what?" Arthur asked, though he knew the answer. "Considering you systematically dismantled her trust and shattered her world for years. That fairness, Arthur, is her dignity. Don't mistake it for indifference." Marcus's tone sharpened, not judgmental, but direct. "She's hurting, Arthur. More than you know. More than you'll ever let yourself know." A familiar knot tightened in Arthur's stomach. It was a knot he had grown accustomed to, a defense mechanism against uncomfortable truths. He deflected. "She seems calm, resolved." "That's the calm of exhaustion, Arthur. The calm of a woman who has finally decided she deserves better than a constant tightrope walk. You think she just woke up one day and filed? This has been brewing. You made sure of it." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations and Arthur's own burgeoning shame. Marcus was right. He had made sure of it. He had always sought something more, something different, never pausing to consider the gaping void within himself that those fleeting connections were meant to fill. He had chased the mirage of novelty, convincing himself he was merely exploring, evolving, when in reality he was just escaping true intimacy, escaping the demands of a love that required vulnerability. He was a master of evasion. His emotionally reserved upbringing had taught him that vulnerability was weakness, that true feelings were best kept locked away. His parents, pillars of stoic practicality, had provided for him, nurtured him, but never truly connected with him on an emotional plane. Expressions of affection were rare, nuanced, almost transactional. He had learned to observe, to analyze, to build, but never to truly feel or express. This had made him an excellent architect, capable of detached precision. It had made him a disastrous husband. Eleanor, with her quiet sensitivity, had been drawn to his seemingly calm demeanor, mistaking his detachment for strength. She had tried to reach him, to soften his edges, to coax out the emotions he so carefully guarded. He had responded with a polite, impenetrable wall, occasionally punctuated by a carefully manufactured display of affection, just enough to keep her tethered, but never truly letting her in. And when the pressure of that authentic connection became too much, he would seek solace in the ephemeral, the uncomplicated, the purely physical. Each affair was a temporary escape, a fleeting high followed by a deeper plunge into self-loathing. He walked into his living room, a space filled with designer furniture and empty air. He traced the smooth edge of a granite countertop, feeling nothing. He remembered Eleanor's small, cluttered art studio in their old house, filled with vibrant colors and the scent of paint and mat, a space that breathed life and creativity. His spaces were always immaculate, devoid of personal history. He often wondered about Sophia, his last affair. She was an artist too, vibrant, ethereal, with a fragility he had unconsciously exploited. She was younger, less grounded, and had seemed captivated by his quiet intensity, mistaking it for depth. Their connection had been an intoxicating blend of artistic idealism and forbidden passion. He had told her half-truths, spun a web of false promises, never intending to leave Eleanor, just to experience something outside the boundaries of his increasingly suffocating marriage. Now, even that memory was tainted by a profound sense of wrongness. The phone line was still open. Marcus cleared his throat. "Are you listening, Arthur?" "Yes, Marcus, I hear you." "Good, because you need to hear this. The divorce is going to happen. You need to prepare yourself for what comes next. And that, my friend, is not just a change of address. It's a reckoning." Arthur ended the call, the word reckoning hanging in the air, a chilling prophecy. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of work, empty evenings, and fitful sleep. His mind, usually sharp and focused on blueprints, now drifted, snagging on fragments of memory. Eleanor's gentle laughter, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, the unspoken questions in her eyes. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just of a wife, but of a future he had carelessly squandered. He was losing not just Eleanor, but the better man he might have been with her. His work suffered. He found himself staring at architectural models, unable to conjure the necessary precision, the innovative spark. His partner, David, a pragmatic man who had always admired Arthur's composure, started to notice. "Everything all right, Arthur? You seem distracted." Arthur just nodded, offering a vague, non-committal answer. He couldn't articulate the hollow ache, the phantom limb of a life that no longer existed. He was adrift in the consequences of his own making, a solitary ship in a vast, empty sea. He tried to reconnect with old friends, but his attempts felt awkward, forced. He had always been the quiet one, the observer, the man who listened but never truly shared. Now, without Eleanor as his emotional proxy, he found himself utterly incapable of genuine connection. He'd sit through dinners, feigning interest, feeling like an alien among people who could effortlessly share their lives, their vulnerabilities, their messy truths. His carefully constructed wall of emotional distance had now become a prison. He reflected on the void within himself. It wasn't about sex or superficial thrills, not truly. It was about filling an emptiness, a profound lack of self-worth that whispered constantly that he wasn't enough, that he wasn't worthy of deep, abiding love. Each affair was an attempt to prove otherwise, a desperate search for external validation. Each time it left him emptier, more fragmented. He saw it now, in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. The realization was a bitter pill, but one he finally grudgingly swallowed. Weeks bled into months. The autumn leaves had fallen, leaving skeletal branches against a stark sky, much like the landscape of Arthur's soul. The divorce was finalized, a quiet, somber affair. Eleanor had maintained her dignity, her silence speaking volumes. Arthur had signed the papers, feeling a strange mix of relief and profound grief. Relief that the pretense was over, grief for what had been and what would never be. He had expected to feel free, unburdened. Instead, the emotional weight settled deeper. The quiet hum of guilt was a constant companion. He tried to move on, filling his evenings with work, books, anything to avoid the deafening silence of his apartment. But the silence held echoes. Eleanor's laugh, a specific song, the shared understanding in a glance. One crisp late November afternoon, as he was reviewing blueprints, his phone vibrated. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something compelled him to answer. "Arthur?" The voice was faint, hesitant. "It's Sophia." His heart lurched, a strange mix of surprise and apprehension. He hadn't heard from her since the painful, awkward conversation when Eleanor had discovered their affair. He had, with his typical detachment, sent her an email, a brief, formal apology, saying he needed to step back. Sophia had simply replied, "I understand. Take care." He had assumed that was the end of it. "Sophia," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. "How are you?" "Not well," she whispered, and he noticed a tremor in her voice. "I wouldn't call, but I don't know who else to talk to." A flicker of something, concern, responsibility, stirred within him. "What's wrong?" "It's complicated. Could we meet, just for a coffee?" Her voice was laced with a desperate urgency that was uncharacteristic of her usual ethereal calm. He hesitated. Meeting her felt like stepping back onto treacherous ground, a relapse into the patterns he was trying to break. But the raw fear in her voice was undeniable, and a part of him, a part he was only just discovering, felt a nascent sense of responsibility. He had, after all, introduced chaos into her life too. "All right," he said, surprising himself. "Where?" She named a small independent coffee shop nestled in a quieter part of the city, not far from her art studio. "Tomorrow, mid-morning? I'll be there." The next morning, the city was shrouded in a thin, cold mist. Arthur arrived early, nursing a black coffee, his mind racing. What could be so urgent? He half expected her to be seeking solace, a rekindling of their past. He steeled himself against it. He couldn't go back down that path. Sophia arrived precisely at 10. Arthur almost didn't recognize her. Her vibrant, artistic spirit seemed to have been extinguished. Her usually luminous eyes were shadowed, her cheekbones more prominent, giving her a gaunt appearance. Her vibrant red hair, usually a wild halo, was pulled back severely as if she was trying to disappear. She wore a thick, shapeless coat that seemed to swallow her small frame. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She slid into the opposite chair, clutching a large, battered leather bag. She didn't meet his gaze directly. "Sophia, you look tired." She offered a weak, humorless smile. "Tired is an understatement. I haven't slept properly in weeks." He waited. The air between them was thick with unaddressed history, with the unspoken apology he owed her and the current, palpable fear radiating from her. I'm being threatened," she finally blurted out, her voice cracking. Arthur felt a cold shock. "Threatened? What do you mean? Physically?" His mind immediately went to the worst, despite his commitment to avoid graphic scenarios. "No, not physically," she clarified, her eyes darting around the cafe, as if expecting someone to materialize. "It's worse. It's about my reputation, my livelihood, my past." She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "Someone knows things. Things about my family, my struggles before I moved here, and things about us." She gestured vaguely between them. "They have photos, private messages. They're threatening to expose everything, to my clients, to galleries, to my family back home. They want money. A lot of it." Arthur felt a wave of nausea. Blackmail. His world, which he thought was finally settling into a predictable rhythm of regret, was suddenly being thrown into chaos again. And this time it was directly linked to his own reckless past. He had, with his casual disregard for consequence, unwittingly opened a door for a predator to enter Sophia's life. "Who?" he asked, his voice tight. "Do you know who it is?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No. Anonymous emails. Untraceable numbers. They just know everything. They know when I'm at my studio, when I go to the market. They send pictures from my window. It's terrifying, Arthur. I feel like I'm always being watched." The fear in her eyes was raw, unmistakable. It wasn't the theatrical fear of a dramatic artist. It was the primal terror of someone truly hunted. The fragile, delicate Sophia, whom he had seen as a fleeting diversion, was now a person in profound distress, directly because of circumstances that he had, in part, created. His self-pity began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility, a dawning empathy he hadn't felt in years. "What do they want?" he asked, his mind already shifting into a problem-solving mode, the architect's precision kicking in even in this unfamiliar territory. "Money, and they keep demanding more, escalating the threats. They're trying to ruin my upcoming exhibition, saying they'll send these facts to every art critic and gallery owner in the city. My career, Arthur, it's everything to me." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in months, not as a lover, not as a source of fleeting pleasure, but as a human being in profound pain. Her vulnerability was startling, and it pricked at something deep within him. He saw a mirror of his own insecurities, his own desperate need for validation, albeit expressed differently. He had used her, and now, a consequence of that usage was threatening to destroy her. This was not a problem he could simply walk away from. This was his reckoning. Arthur found himself drawn into Sophia's terrifying reality, a world of anonymous threats and constant fear. He helped her move her most valuable art pieces, install better locks, and change her routines. But the psychological threat remained. He realized quickly that this was not a matter for the police in the conventional sense. There was no direct physical danger, just insidious, calculated psychological warfare designed to isolate and break her. He called Marcus. He omitted the details of his past relationship with Sophia, framing it as a friend in trouble. Marcus, ever astute, sensed more. "Blackmail, Arthur? This is serious. You need to be extremely careful." Are you sure you want to get involved? She's vulnerable, Marcus, and I can't just stand by. The words surprised Arthur. He hadn't realized how much he meant them. Marcus sighed. All right. Legally, I can't advise you to engage with criminals, but if it's about information, digital trails, reputation management, that's a different story. Who is she to you, Arthur? Arthur hesitated. Someone I hurt, Marcus. Someone I need to make amends to in some way. The raw honesty was liberating, terrifying. Marcus was silent for a moment. Well, that's a start. Let's talk through the parameters. Arthur began his own discreet investigation, applying his meticulous architectural mind to the problem. He looked for patterns, for inconsistencies. He helped Sophia analyze the emails, the messages, the subtle details in the photos sent by the blackmailer. The blackmailer seemed to know details about Sophia's early life, struggles with her family, and a difficult period before she found success as an artist. This suggested someone who had known her intimately or had access to very personal information. He delved into the digital footprint, metadata, IP addresses, but the blackmailer was savvy, using VPNs and burner accounts. He also started looking at Sophia's recent dealings, her art circle, her gallery contacts. He found himself spending hours in coffee shops, poring over documents, something he hadn't done outside of work in years. It was a bizarre kind of clarity, a purpose he hadn't felt since Eleanor left. His efforts led him down unexpected paths. He discovered that a former art dealer of Sophia's, a man named Adrian Vance, no relation to Marcus, had recently faced financial ruin. Adrian, known for his cutthroat tactics and unscrupulous dealings, had felt Sophia owed him, claiming she'd left his gallery prematurely, costing him significant commissions. He had a reputation for vindictiveness. It was a long shot, but the details seemed to fit. Arthur arranged a meeting with Adrian under the pretense of discussing a potential art commission for a new development project. He chose a busy, neutral restaurant, a place where the ambient noise would allow for a nuanced conversation, and the public setting would deter any overt aggression. Adrian Vance was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with eyes that held a cold, calculating glint. He exuded an air of cultured menace. Mr. Thorne, a pleasure. Your work is quite admirable. Adrian offered a thin smile. Thank you. Your reputation precedes you as well, Mr. Vance, particularly regarding your unique approach to talent management. Arthur let the words hang in the air, a subtle challenge. Adrian's smile tightened. One does what one must to survive in this cutthroat world, wouldn't you agree? His gaze was piercing. Artists, especially, so temperamental, so quick to forget those who gave them their start. Arthur felt a surge of cold anger. This was it. Indeed. Some, however, seem to forget that true success is built on mutual respect, not coercion. Adrian chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Coercion? Strong word, Mr. Thorne. I prefer to call it persuasive negotiation. Some individuals, particularly those with colorful pasts, require a bit more motivation to see the light. Arthur kept his voice even, his face impassive, and some individuals seem to believe that a little blackmail can be a path to financial recovery. Adrian's eyes narrowed, the affable mask slipping slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Thorne. I'm implying that I know about Sophia Davies, and I know about the threats. Arthur pushed a small, discreetly taken photograph across the table. It was a blurry image of Adrian captured on a public street near Sophia's studio, not definitive proof, but enough to rattle him. And he had compiled a dossier of digital breadcrumbs, however faint, linking Adrian to the anonymous accounts. Adrian's face went rigid. His eyes darted to the photo, then back to Arthur. The subtle shift in his composure was telling. You're making a grave mistake, Mr. Thorne. This is defamation. Is it? Or is it merely stating a truth that you hoped would remain in the shadows? Arthur continued, his voice calm, direct, utterly devoid of emotion. This was the architect, systematically dismantling a flawed structure. I have enough information, Adrian, to connect you to the anonymous emails, the specific details of Sophia's past, and the timing of your demands. I have witnesses who can attest to your vindictive nature, and I have resources. My firm has deep pockets, and a legal team that relishes a good fight. If you continue to harass Sophia Davies, I will ensure that every single one of your former clients, every gallery owner, every art critic, knows exactly what kind of man you are. Not just as a blackmailer, but as a desperate, pathetic schemer. Adrian's jaw clenched. He knew Arthur Thorne's reputation, his influence. He knew that Arthur, despite his past, was not a man to make idle threats, especially when protecting something. What do you want? Adrian hissed, his voice low, venomous. You cease all contact with Sophia Davies. You delete all the information you have on her. You never approach her, never threaten her, never speak of her again. And if I hear even a whisper of you trying to destroy her career, I will come for yours. And I assure you, Adrian, I will be far more effective than you could ever imagine. The silence that followed was heavy, fraught with tension. Adrian's eyes were cold, assessing. He was weighing the risks, the potential for ruin. He knew Arthur wasn't driven by petty revenge, but by a chilling, almost detached determination. He saw a man who had faced his own personal abyss and was now capable of ruthless, calculated action. Finally, Adrian gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood, Mr. Thorne. His voice was grudging, defeated. Consider the matter closed. Arthur rose, his face expressionless. See that it stays that way, Adrian, for both our sakes. Walking out of the restaurant, Arthur felt a strange mix of exhilaration and profound weariness. He had faced down a predator, protected someone he had once carelessly discarded. But the victory felt hollow. It wasn't just about Adrian Vance. It was about confronting the shadow of his own past, the irresponsibility that had opened the door for such a threat in Sophia's life. He saw clearly how his casual disregard for commitment, his incessant need for fleeting validation, had ripple effects that extended far beyond his own immediate pain. The fear in Sophia's eyes had been a mirror, reflecting the destructive chaos he brought into the lives he touched. This was his reckoning. The days after the confrontation with Adrian Vance were quiet. Sophia, though still fragile, slowly began to regain her sense of security. Arthur helped her implement new digital safeguards, consulted with her on gallery contracts, and simply listened as she slowly processed the trauma. He didn't offer grand gestures of romance or rekindle old flames. His support was grounded in a new, uncomfortable sense of ethical responsibility. He saw her now not as an affair, but as a person, a vulnerable soul he had unwittingly placed in harm's way. Their relationship transformed from a clandestine, guilt-laden secret into a quiet, supportive friendship built on a shared, difficult experience. He began to learn what true care, devoid of self-interest, felt like. Meanwhile, Eleanor was on her own path. Arthur heard snippets from Marcus, who maintained professional contact with Eleanor's lawyer. She had sold the old house, moving into a smaller, sunlit apartment overlooking a park. She had returned to her love of pottery, taking classes, even contemplating opening a small studio. She had also begun seeing a therapist, diligently working through the layers of betrayal and grief. Marcus described her as calmly radiating independence. Arthur realized he needed his own reckoning. The confrontation with Adrian, while successful, had been a stark reminder of his own destructive patterns. He felt a profound moral torment, a gnawing guilt for the years of emotional neglect and infidelity, not just towards Eleanor, but towards his own integrity. He realized he had been running from himself for decades, from the unhealed wounds of his childhood, from the fear of vulnerability, from the profound loneliness he carried. He made the difficult decision to seek therapy. His first session was awkward, filled with his usual guardedness, but his therapist, a calm, insightful woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, was patient. She didn't judge. She simply listened, prompting him gently, holding up a mirror to his defenses. Arthur, Dr. Reed said during one session, you speak of your childhood as distant, reserved. What did you learn about love and connection in that environment? Arthur thought for a long moment. That it was conditional. That feelings were messy, best kept hidden, that stability was more important than expression. And how did that translate into your adult relationships? He finally admitted it, the words heavy with shame. I ran from intimacy, from true commitment. I built walls, and when the walls felt too tight, I found exits. Other people, other lives that wouldn't demand anything real from me. Dr. Reed nodded. You sought external validation to fill an internal void. But that void, Arthur, can only be filled from within, by acknowledging your pain, by taking responsibility, by forgiving yourself, and by learning to truly connect. The therapy sessions were grueling, stripping away layers of self-deception. He revisited painful memories of his parents' emotional detachment, his unspoken yearning for their affection, the feeling of not being enough. He saw how these early experiences had shaped his fear of intimacy, his tendency to sabotage relationships, his constant search for external validation. The melancholic tone that had permeated his existence began to shift, replaced by moments of raw grief, followed by glimpses of clarity. He started to rebuild his relationship with David at the firm, not just professionally, but personally. He began to confide, albeit cautiously, in Marcus, sharing some of his deeper insights from therapy. He learned to listen, truly listen, to others without formulating his next deflection. He also found solace in rediscovering parts of himself he had neglected. He started sketching again, not blueprints, but abstract forms, raw emotions translated onto paper. He walked through old neighborhoods, noticing the subtle shifts in light, the texture of weathered brick, seeing the world with a newly awakened eye. These small acts of engagement, of presence, were profound. One day, Arthur saw Eleanor. He was leaving his office, and she was walking out of a nearby art gallery, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She looked different, not just physically, but there was a quiet confidence in her stride, a lightness in her expression he hadn't seen in years. Her hair was styled differently, a soft, flowing cascade, and she wore a vibrant blue scarf that accentuated her eyes. Their eyes met across the bustling street. For a moment, time seemed to slow. There was no anger in her gaze, no lingering bitterness, only a deep, calm acknowledgement. A shared history, painfully etched, but now seen with the clarity of distance. He offered a small, hesitant nod. She returned it, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, and a faint, gentle smile that carried no malice, only peace. Then she turned and continued on her way, a woman walking confidently into her future. Arthur watched her go, a profound sense of acceptance washing over him. He felt no desire to reconcile, no urge to speak, just a quiet understanding. She was healing, and he was too, in his own way. Their paths had diverged irrevocably, but the echoes of their past had led them both to a deeper understanding of themselves. Months turned into a year. The cityscape, once an indifferent backdrop, now felt like a living entity. Its rhythm, something Arthur was finally attuned to. He was demonstrably changed. The hollowness was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. His conversations were no longer carefully curated deflections, but genuine exchanges. He learned to be present, to truly listen, to offer empathy without seeking anything in return. His architectural work had regained its spark, imbued now with a deeper understanding of human needs and connection. He designed spaces that fostered warmth, intimacy, and a sense of belonging, reflecting the internal architecture he was painstakingly rebuilding within himself. His relationship with Sophia had stabilized into a true, supportive friendship. She had, with his help, successfully launched her exhibition, and her career was flourishing. She was more confident, less fragile, having found her own strength after the ordeal. They met for coffee occasionally, discussing art, life, and the quiet journey of healing. Their shared trauma had forged an unusual but genuine bond, free of the complications of their past romantic entanglement. He listened to her dreams, offered advice, and saw her as a testament to resilience, a reminder of the consequences of his past, and a beacon of hope for his future. Arthur continued with therapy, seeing it not as a cure, but as an ongoing process of self-discovery and maintenance. He recognized that true intimacy wasn't a sudden revelation, but a conscious, daily choice. He was learning to be vulnerable, to express his feelings, to trust. The melancholic torment had given way to a reflective peace, a quiet wisdom gained through suffering. One afternoon, Arthur sat on a park bench, the same park Eleanor now lived near. He watched children playing, their laughter ringing clear in the crisp Eleanor. He thought her quiet strength, her journey to peace. He felt a surge of respect, not just for her, but for the inherent resilience of the human spirit. He pulled out a small, worn notebook from his pocket, not a sketchbook for architecture, but a journal for his thoughts. He began to write, tracing the painful arc of his journey, the years of emotional dishonesty, the hollow pursuit of fleeting validation, the wreckage he had left in his wake, the terrifying shock of the divorce, the unexpected turn of Sophia's plight, and finally, the slow, arduous climb towards self-awareness and accountability. He wrote about the shame, the guilt, the fear of true connection. He wrote about the moment he truly saw Sophia's fear and how it had ignited something within him, a nascent sense of responsibility he had never allowed himself to feel. He wrote about the confrontation with Adrian, not as an act of heroism, but as a necessary act of rectification, a step towards righting a wrong he had indirectly caused. He concluded his entry with a reflection on the future. He didn't know what it held. There was no grand romantic reunion, no sudden happily ever after. But there was something far more profound, a deep understanding of himself, an acceptance of his flaws, and a quiet confidence in his capacity for growth. He had learned that true love wasn't about passion or perfection, but about courage, vulnerability, and sustained effort. He understood that healing was a continuous process, not a destination. The sun, low in the late afternoon sky, cast long shadows across the park. Arthur closed his journal, feeling a profound sense of peace. The man who had once been a hollow shell, defined by his mistakes and his fear of intimacy, was now whole, filled not with fleeting desires, but with quiet strength and a genuine capacity for empathy. The echoes of his past still lingered, but they were no longer tormented whispers. They were lessons, softly humming, guiding him towards a future built on integrity, authenticity, and the quiet, revolutionary hope of genuine human connection. He was no longer just an architect of buildings, but an architect of his own soul, finally building a life worthy of the name.